Hello and welcome back to the Weekend Handyman. Today, or well, what you're watching today anyways, is another video on the 1997 MXZ 670. This time around though, what I'm working on is the brakes. Now, what needed to be changed was the caliper and the rotor. What was happening is I had a sticky rotor, which I had attempted to clean it up, rebuild it, etc. Didn't work, and I also had a bent rotor. So, what I had did is shopped around on eBay actually, and found or put together, the parts I needed. I was able to find good, clean, used parts on eBay for a lot cheaper than I would have to, say, buy them new. Probably about a quarter of the price. So after removing the caliper, which is what you just saw being removed, it's time to remove the secondary clutch, is what you're watching now. There's just a bolt that holds it on. Definitely note and be sure to keep all the shims and the collar that's in there. Otherwise you will mess up the tension and alignment of your secondary clutch, which would be good because then you'll burn through your belt, which nobody would like because nobody likes being without a belt in your snowmobile. Trust me. Of course the belt needs to come off. Then after you have your belt off, the secondary clutch will just slide right off. Now if you're wondering, I was basically using this sled without the brakes, which I don't recommend, but also note, there's a keyway in there. That's important as well. You are also going to have to remove your airbox and the plastic shield up on top there, and I also went ahead and removed the rubber thing over the handlebars. These are just to make it easier to get the jackshaft and stuff like that. Your next step is pretty simple. There is a bearing retainer that needs to be taken off so you can slide the jackshaft out once you get the chain case all taken apart. There's just 4 bolts that hold it in, pretty simple. I believe they're all Torx except for one, if I remember correctly. Now to continue the story about riding the sled with no brakes, turns out it's not a very good idea, because I tend to like to go fast, and I was riding behind one of my buddies, and he decided to slow down or stop, and I ended up rear-ending him. Which, nobody got hurt or anything like that, but, it's a little bit annoying, I suppose, like that. So the moral of the story, of course, is going fast is fun. So what you're about to see next is me attempting to remove the springs that hold the exhaust on. Now, this is the way you do not want to do this. There are much better ways to do this than I have chosen to do it. One such example is contained in the video that Ethan had posted, one of the compadres of this channel. If you didn't know, this channel actually is not only one person, there's actually 4 people who run this YouTube channel. I am one of them. My name is Josh. Ethan is the other one I just mentioned. There's also Matt, and there's a Brad. But Ethan, here, I'll throw a link up on the annotation here. You can click that, and there's a much better way to do this, where you take a screwdriver and notch it, and then you could hook onto the spring, and pull. Unlike what I've chosen to do, which is go bareback on it and attempt to use pliers, which just clearly did not work at all. My hand hurt for probably a couple weeks after I attempted this method. So after nearly probably breaking my hand, I decided to step it up to a slightly better method. Well, in this case anyways, of removing the springs that hold the exhaust together. I went and grabbed one of those pliers and stuck them down and hooked them on the inside of the spring hook that was hooked onto a little hook thing that holds the exhaust together. I don't know, that's probably the best way I know how to describe it. And that works slightly better. I was eventually successful in getting all the springs on. There are, let me see, there's like 8 or 10 of them that you have to undo. So eventually, after fighting them with the needle-nose pliers now, I did get them all off. But ultimately, the best method is to create a tool using a screwdriver with a notch in it. Just pick, a screwdriver that you don't like anymore or is cheap or something. Or you could also use like vice grips. you could use those. It'd be a much better method because you could get a really tight grip on them, or on the spring rather, and pull everything off. Of course, because I'm Butterfingers, I drop everything. You know, what changes? So this is what it looks like after you put your sled on a 40-pound diet. That's about how much the exhaust weighs. Next, of course, is take apart the chain case. There are 4 bolts that hold it together. You can only see 3 of them. The 4th one is way down in the bottom there, which requires little Asian hands to get to. Of course, I don't have little Asian hands, so it's kind of a challenge. But I eventually got it out. Now, there is a rubber gasket that goes around the edge of the chain case cover, O-ring style, I suppose, which is why I was having trouble getting it off. Well, not necessarily because of the gasket itself, but apparently at some point in the Snowmobile's life, the chain case cover had leaked. So one of the previous owners took and pounded a bunch of RTV in the bottom half of the gasket where it seals with the rest of the chain case. So of course it's, a little stuck on there. Another unfortunate thing about the design of this chain case is there's not a drain plug. So you can't drain the oil before you take it apart. So you just take it apart and the oil just kind of all goes everywhere. There's a couple different ways to kind of collect it. I had just stuffed as much rags under it as possible, and then of course some of it ended up draining out the exhaust hole. I've heard of people, or read about people on forums and stuff like that, who would try and lay like a tinfoil tray down or some sort of plastic tray down to collect it all. There's really not much in there. I think it's only 250 milliliters or something like that. But it's just annoying. But that's what it looks like. I mean, that chain case oil, who knows the last time it's been changed. So, of course, the next step is going to remove that castle nut. Then you'll be able to pull that top gear off, and the entire chain will come off. So next up is to remove the cotter pin. Cotter pins are pretty easy to come out. All you're going to do is unbend the part that gets bent around the castle nut itself. Then you just pull the cotter pin out just like that. Usually you can reuse them. Sometimes, if they've been removed a bunch of different times, you might not be able to. If you need to replace it, it's not hard to come by. You go to an auto parts store, you can buy a really big pack of them for pretty cheap. Of course, I had to use the hammer at first. Turns out I have to untension the chain, which is a pretty easy task. You just undo that bolt. Then you can remove the top gear just like that, and behind that is a sleeve. Now the sleeve can go on either way. It's not, directional in any way. No problem there. After that's done and the top gear's off, the rest of the chain comes out no problem. The chain is pretty beefy. It's pretty heavy though, and there are actually options, or not options, but upgrades to, well, not, I guess you could consider it an upgrade, yeah, to a belt, which is much lighter, which allows for much quicker low-end, speed right off the line, because you're not turning all the weight on that chain and whatnot. But personally, I still prefer the chain, just for the extra beefiness of it. Then after that, don't forget that keyway. That's a pretty important keyway again. They all are, really. And then the rotor just comes right out. So next up is a little bit of cleaning on the inside of the chain case. Now, you don't have to if you want to be dirty about it, but, I mean, in my eyes, it's still the right thing to do. Since you have it all apart, you might as well clean it, right? So that's exactly what I did. Next, of course, is reassembly, actually. We're getting there. Keyway goes in. Definitely don't forget that keyway. You won't be able to stop at all. This is the new used rotor that I acquired for the sled. Nice and straight, clean it up. And after a little bit of persuasion, I air quotes little, I got the shaft through the rotor. And it's in there nice and snug. That collar, remember, goes on anyway. It's non-directional, doesn't matter how it goes on. Then that gear goes I guess you could say after that collar. Now the chain. Good old chain. So after about 10 minutes of fiddling with it, the chain finally goes back on, and I'm not kidding, about 10 minutes. I mean, there was legit 10 minutes of footage that I had to cut down to get that chain on there. Calcium that goes on next, fairly simple. Same way it goes back on. There is a torque spec on it. I think, don't quote me, definitely look up this torque spec, but I think it's 75 foot-pounds. Like I said, do not take that as the Bible. Definitely look it up yourself. Of course, with the calcium nut, the cotter pin has to go back in. You could either reuse the one that came out of it, or you could get a new one. They're pretty cheap. I just reused the one that was already in there because it was in really good shape. I just needed to rebend the prongs on it. Of course, we have to retighten the chain, which is what I'm doing now. I believe, again, definitely make sure. I think it's a 1/4 inch to a 1/2 inch of, I guess you could say depression on that for it to be tight. And of course, because there was a bunch of RTV on the bottom half of that Chaincase cover, I of course returned the favor and put my own RTV on the bottom half of that Chaincase cover, because I assume it was probably leaking at one point. So it's just to scratch it off a list of things that could happen, I just put the RTV on there myself, just like one of the previous people would have did. So your next step is my next step anyways, because I had to replace the rotor and the caliper, was to take the old caliper off. Now, I've already had the caliper off a couple times. Trust me, it was not that loose. I had already loosened up with a wrench. Keep in mind that there are little copper washers, washers on there. Don't lose those. Depending on what you get, your new caliper might have them, might not. But this is the new caliper. And I bet you your car doesn't have Brembo brakes, but my Snowmobile does. But like I was saying, I already had the caliper apart once to try and clean it up and clean the pins up, because I thought that's why it was sticking, but that didn't solve the problem at all. It was something more internal, and instead of rebuilding it, it was cheap enough to just get a new used one, so that's what I ended up doing. The caliper just goes right back on the bracket that it came off of, assuming you get the right caliper. There is a little bar that goes across there. Technically the purpose of the bar is so that the nuts... Oh, good job, Butterfingers. Yeah, get in there and get it. Like I was saying, the bar is technically there to keep the bolts from loosening up. So when you take it off, or what I did anyways, was bend the little tabs back. You don't really, I guess, need to put it back on, because unless you bend the tabs back over to hold the bolts in place. But really, that's the only purpose of that bar. You don't necessarily need to put it back on. I did, just because I had it, and I'd probably lose it otherwise. But that's that. Not again, but make sure you don't over-tighten those, because those are aluminum, or that chain case is aluminum, and you'll strip them out if you're not careful. Note there that I have the little copper washers. One on the bottom, and there's one that goes on top of that little fitting. Then, of course, tighten it down, nice and tight. So go ahead and bleed your brakes next. Start with the furthest nipple and go to the closer one to the inlet on the caliper. Same process that you'd use on your car. And then I went ahead and used Valvoline 75W90. It's about 250 milliliters, or you could use a dipstick like I just showed. There's not any reason that you have to use the Ski-Doo gear or Chaincase oil. There's nothing special about it besides the fact that it's more expensive. So I went ahead and just used the Valvoline 75W90. Same shit. Then on this side, of course, there is the Torx bolts and the normal bolt that hold on the bearings. The secondary clutch goes right on, the Kiwi goes in, and of course it needed a little bit of extra persuasion, so I gave it. Then don't forget about all the shims and the collar that goes on that bolt that holds on the secondary clutch. And of course we had to go ahead and start up the sled and test out the brakes, because what Snowmobile do is complete without testing it, or any of you do really. But that's it. Thanks for watching. Click the like button and subscribe, and check out our other videos. You can go ahead and watch Matt talk about coffee if you want.